But Dr. Fenn, if you were the head of AID or the President of the United States or the head of the World Bank or the Secretary General of the United Nations, that's probably the best job for you that I can think of right now. Okay, so what are the most important things that can be done, either by the U.S. or others, to build self-sufficiency, build productive capability, and to relieve these pressures on hunger and humanitarian disasters in the developing world? What would you recommend? What's your three-point program?
Probably you better be asking me if I advise the president of the World Bank or U.S. Or maybe Raj. Not necessarily I will be in that position. So I think, yes, we really need to look at specific purposes of different programs. The U.S. Feed the Future program, it's another flagship program here in the U.S., together with the Food for Peace, have really helped many countries to use agriculture for broader development outcomes, such as improving nutrition, health, food security. But more needs to be done. I think it's a good start. I really hope the U.S. will continue to invest in agricultural development, in rural development, in poor countries. Food aid has its own unique roles, purpose. As I said, different kinds of food aid. And that sort of food aid structure needs to be changed based on evidence, based on research. So truly based on evidence to make the program more efficient. Or the World Bank or the UN, let's say UN Secretary General, can really push the food security, agriculture into very high agenda. As you know, right now, there's a hot debate about post-2015 development agenda, the post-2015, post-MDG agenda. We should really have the ambition to eliminate hunger by 2025, not necessarily half, but reduce the number or the percentage of hungry people by half, right? That was the MDG 1 goal from 1990 to 2015. We should have the ambition to eliminate hunger, not just to reduce them by a certain percentage. I think we can do it if we all work together. Food aid, investment, trade. Trade is another huge issue. Self-sufficiency, I think I have to be careful. I think it's not self-sufficient, it's how we can work together to make sure that the trade system works for everybody.
Because not everybody will be able to produce enough to feed their own.
That's right.
You have to rely on others to...
Yes, well, self-sufficient, does that mean I have to produce everything I need? No, that's very inefficient. For a country, same, right? A country can share, can trade. Everybody will benefit from that. I know, you used to be the Secretary of Agriculture, going around to sell the idea, but that idea is still relevant to make sure that we have fair, transparent, functioning trade system where the people can share what they have and what they don't have.
Ellen, if you have any comments to what Dr. Fenn said.
I like what you're saying about there is a move right now, and I'm happy to see it with the nutrition now becoming a focal point, at the G20 and among, developed countries. I think that there is a move to put nutrition in a place where it's never been before, and a focal point. We've talked a lot about poverty alleviation as contributing to economic growth and bringing, smallholder farmers and people who are struck by poverty out of it, but what we're really learning is that it's not just a matter of income growth. You can't just grow GDP and say that means that there will be better nutrition of children and better developmental outcomes. So we're looking at life cycle now. Nutrition affects the life cycle. And indeed, people are now saying, and USAID is looking at itself, as well as post-MDGs, how we can put nutrition at the top. In other words, just as much as we've looked at, GDP and income, what we should be putting nutrition up there as an indicator for several reasons. Number one is that it's an excellent indicator of broad-based growth and also life cycle, basically living through the life cycles. So I completely agree with what you're saying, and I'm seeing a lot of movement in that. There's a lot of realignment of objectives. Of Feed the Future even has an objective of reducing stunting of children, which is a nutrition indicator. And Food for Peace, we have that as our PL40. Food for Peace has a development program, and the nonprofits mainly do that, and groups I work with, and their objective is what? reduce stunting of children, improve mother-child health and nutrition, because we want to measure that as our outcome. We're not just looking at, but even just measuring that has to be, even in our population group, we're not just helping just through the nutrition, giving them food, no. It's training and building local capacity so they can produce a diversity of foods and they can have incomes in their household. So we actually do have a package of program that goes around that, focal point of decreasing malnutrition of mothers and children. That is part of the food aid program. I want to emphasize that. It's not in all the programs. And this is where monetization comes in. Roger, there's one point about monetization. Under Food for Peace, it's really something like, only like, I think it's like 15% of the whole funding is used actually for monetization. And it's used in the programs that are what we call the development programs. And these programs, I agree with you that it doesn't make any sense just to bring food over. If I'm bringing rice over to a country that produces rice, of course not. But if I'm bringing it to a country like Mozambique that is low income, has, doesn't have hard currency, has exchange rate issues when trying to import, has horrible malnutrition throughout the country, really relies on imports for wheat. They're not going to grow wheat, and there's not a lot of wheat available in the African continent. I'm saying, so we actually donate wheat for monetization. We're talking about a small amount, but let me tell you remember 2008 when we had the price spike and wheat prices went up? They cut their imports almost in half of wheat because they're so price sensitive. So what I'm saying is we're dealing with countries that really have limited access to credit, limited access to hard currency. So the monetization is a small thing compared to their need, but it helps them. And then the funds are used to support activities. But in some cases, monetization
Although
doesn't
we
work.
have many NGOs on both sides of that question.
Oh yeah. But no, wait, but we even have in my membership, a lot of my members aren't just using monetization. I want to be clear. We support the idea that cash should be available. What we're learning is that, thank goodness, we hope, as countries become more, first of all, they reduce barriers to trade, they become better able to supply their own needs, they have better access to credit. Obviously, one would hope they could be importing the food that's in shortfall, right, commercially. So yeah, we understand that, but I hate to say it, but there are a lot of countries that aren't in that boat. Now, there's another side to that equation. A lot of nonprofits don't want to monetize for another reason. They just want to get money for their programs. And we agree that in cases where you just want to get money for your programs, absolutely cash is the way to go. But there are cases, nonetheless, where monetization and getting the cash from monetization can be beneficial. Whether an organization wants to do that or not is something else. There's a lot of liability if you are the monetizing agent. That's part of it.
Okay, we're going to open this up for questions, but I want one final point. I'd like to ask Dr. Fenn this question. I want to give you an anecdote. I was in Tanzania last year, and a young government official came up to me and said, "You have the greatest country in the world," he said to me, the U.S. And I said, "Why is that?" He says, he didn't answer the question. He says, "You have three of the greatest leaders in the world in your country." And I said, "Who are they?" And he said, "You have Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama." And I said, "I don't think I could find 15 people in the United States to say those were the three greatest leaders in the world." Why is that? They said, because, and they went through your work on helping the developing world, your work on AIDS and malaria. Actually, they really almost put George W. Bush a cut above the other two folks there. But they talked about America's engagement in the world. We spend less than 1% of the national budget on foreign assistance, development assistance, and related issues, and yet it's still very, very unpopular. People think, you poll people, they think we're spending 10, 15, 20% of our national budget on assistance, and it's really less than 1%. But from your perspective, I assume you're still a citizen of China, is that correct? And you've lived here in this country for many years, and you run a worldwide development agency. How important is the United States' role in the issue of food security?
Well, firstly, I'm a global citizen.
Global citizen, okay.
So yes, I have a Chinese passport, but I lived here in the U.S. for many years. I also traveled to many different countries. Yes, I think U.S. has a huge, huge role to play in leadership, not only in terms of investment, but also in terms of science and technology, in terms of policy, trade policy, marketing policy, then the investment. So all this can play a huge role. I remember in the 60s, 70s, the USAID, or together with USDA, had lots of training programs for Asian, for Africans, and lots of experimental stations set up by USDA, USAID in Egypt, which I visited. And all this program played a huge role. Green Revolution, the Green Revolution in Asia, Norman Borlaug is American. He's from Minnesota. I studied in Minnesota.
You went to the University of Minnesota, right?
I studied there, yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the Green Revolution happened with strong U.S. support. Not only government, but also the foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation. But then in the 80s, 90s, particularly 90s, U.S. moved away from that, moved away from support to these programs. And these countries were not ready to take over. You see lots of capacity that has been depleted. And we've got to rebuild that. I truly believe U.S. has a great role to play by building their capacity, by improving the policy environment, by working together with others on trade. Trade, I wanted to emphasize trade issues. Trade, U.S. can play a leading role there right now. Right now, it's less ideal for both Europe and agriculture side. Probably U.S. is okay, but more working with the Europeans, Japanese to make sure that we have a more transparent, fair trade policy. So my conclusion is, yes, U.S. has a huge role to play, a leading role to play, but that role has not been sort of fully realized yet.
Okay. All right, so let's open it up for questions. They can be directed to the whole panel or individual members. We'd ask you to raise your hand. We ask you to ask a question and not repeat the Constitution of the United States, if you can possibly help that. And keep your question as short as you can. And if you'd identify yourself and where you're from, that would also be helpful. So we have a gentleman in the blue shirt and then a lady right back there, a second.
Thank you. I'm John Coonrod with the Hunger Project, and my question's for Shenggen. When you talked about the importance of strengthening markets in developing countries, what would you say are the three most needed interventions for strengthening markets?
Want to answer one by one?
Yeah, one by one. You can. The three most important interventions to strengthen markets.
Firstly, the infrastructure has to be improved. Rural roads, information infrastructure, all this have to be improved. Let's say in DRC Congo, where I just visited about 2 weeks ago, the farmers have tremendous potential to double the yield or triple the yield of cassava. But because of lack of access to markets, the poor roads, they will not be able to sell to the markets. So that's probably number one. Second, it's a regulation, the government regulation, and also the anti-corruption. If you drive a truck from Lagos to northern Nigeria, probably you will be stopped 3 or 4 times. Every time you have to pay some toll, road toll, but not the official ones. Right, so they stop you. This not only increase the time, but also increase the transaction costs. So that's probably number 3. Number 2. Number 3, we have already mentioned about the government's role in stabilizing the market by providing information, by setting up some proper reserve for emergency purpose. So probably that's number 3. I don't want to go beyond the number 3.
Anybody else have any comments here to that?
I liked what you were saying about Nigeria, because one of the things I was meeting with the poultry producers who are in the Southwest, and they have to get their corn, for feed from the north. It costs them more. It was costing them in January of this year $600 a metric ton to get corn from the north of Nigeria down there because the rail system has not been functional. They were dying to get U.S. corn. They were talking, and they've been dying to, but yet then they're not real good on the credit side. So there's a lot of hesitancy for accessing markets. So I think you're bringing out. There's so many underlying causes. I just want to point out one thing. You're talking about markets. Okay, a lot of the groups I work with also work with bringing the really poor guy and woman into the market. There's baby steps and big steps, and you got to start. Sometimes when you're starting, and you can relate to this, when you're really remote, when you don't have access to those, to inputs, and you don't have access to services and good roads, you got to start somewhere. I just want to point out one of the good news things about our food aid programs is we really do reach those people and try to help them get that first step up. First of all, just to look for the first time that they don't have to be subsistence, that's not hand to mouth, but they can take a step beyond that and actually get into the market. So I think that's really critical. So we need to be hitting the top, what you're hitting is so true, but also the bottom. So we need to kind of sandwich it so that, throughout, so the marketing system throughout, all the way through the country.
And Roger?
I would just underscore a point that was made about governance. Markets do not work without rules. They just do not. I mean, if there are no rules, people steal, anything goes. And so, I'm no expert in foreign aid, but I do understand a little bit about economics. And you do have to have, there's got to be a rules-based system. And I think that really is sort of a base that probably requires an educated population. And so a lot of this stuff is very, very fundamental. I couldn't agree more about the need for infrastructure. I would argue both of these things I mentioned are really infrastructure kinds of issues. And that is just very important. And it underscores the reason why I agree we ought to abolish hunger. That ought to be our goal. But just putting food in front of hungry people doesn't solve the problem unless you can figure out how to help themselves solve the problem through all these things that we've been talking about.
It's an interesting, and there's a couple more questions. I just tell you, when I was in Tanzania, wherever I went, I visited, groups of farmers and some successful women farmers who were operating a vegetable operation west of Dar es Salaam and other places. And I said, it looks to me like you folks ought to really be engaged and take advantage of the cooperative movement. And I told them about how cooperatives were so integral to the development of agriculture in the United States.
Yep.
Because farmers could not market on their own. They needed this group situation. And I was given a lesson in cooperatives in many places in Africa, and it's not a very happy lesson. It's a lesson of poor governance and corruption.
Yep.
And so I've told the folks that I've met with in the cooperative movement here in the United States that there's a lot to be done to try to build legal, well-established cooperatives that have the confidence of people who use them, because in many cases it's very difficult for smallholder farmers to market their crops and distribute them and transport them without doing it in some sort of group setting.
Yep.
I don't know if the cooperative is the only way to do it, but it certainly is one that worked in this country.
But you
In
need
fact-
rules.
Yes,
Yep.
in fact, you asked me to give 3 priorities. That's actually my 4th priority.
I knew that. That's why I said
How
it.
the farmers can be organized. Cooperative is only one way. You have many other ways. Women's organization
Yes.
and vertical and horizontal organizations.
Yes.
This is so critical. The farmers can empower themselves. So not only they share the information, share the technology, marketing information, but also they have much bigger bargaining powers with supermarkets, with urban markets. Otherwise, they will be cheated by these traders.
Let's see, this lady back here, and if we could have the mic.
Hi, I'm Kendall Singleton from the Wallace Center at Winrock International. And my question is, I'm wondering kind of what other developed countries don't really know, but I assume that they provide some food aid of their own to developing countries. And I'm just wondering if any of them have kind of innovative processes in place, or if they're doing anything creative that the U.S. might learn from or look to for ideas as we kind of go through this transition.
Dr. Penn?
Yeah, in fact, the European Union, EC, started to change the modality of food aid from in-kind to cash probably 5 or 6 years ago. The Canada and Japan probably have more shares in cash in vouchers than in kind. So I think U.S. still has the largest share of in-kind food aid.
And the Canadians, I think, are in a similar way. They have, I don't know if they're all cash, but they have moved from commodities to cash,
Yeah.
I think, and they were all very big exporters. I don't know about Brazil, because
Brazil doesn't provide
They do,
much
they do food aid. Yeah, they do in kind. They've
Yeah.
been giving, but it's not reliable. You know, it's off and on. They just committed, what was it, 700,000 metric tons? I see somebody back there who would know, over a period of 2 years, wasn't it? Is that what it was, over 2 years? The 700,000, something like that, metric tons, you know, yeah, over 2 years. But and then they needed the cash to go with it, you know, so, but, and the European Union, actually, its paper was written, was it 1994 or 1996, the EU, on converting to cash from in kind. And they did, and within the next 10 years, their food aid levels dropped in half. This was one of the reasons that converting to cash got this kind of, you know, like from the folks I work with. We are worried about, okay, fine, converting, giving more flexibility for cash is good, but we got to keep that base of food aid available. And so there's got to be a delicate balance here. We have to deal with the practicality that even though we're talking about the good news story of what we can do to help people move along the chain and develop co-ops and all that, we all support that. We can't forget that people still need food. So I just hope we don't forget, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, yeah.
let's see, I think, Marshall, you had a question, this gentleman, handsome gentleman with the white hair, kind of in the middle there.
profiling.
That's the first
You
time.
mean
Wait,
Marshall's
wait.
not,
No, I'm
Marshall's
sorry.
not
That's
handsome?
not Marshall, that's the
He's
guy
not
behind.
handsome?
Yeah.
Marshall, I wouldn't take that.
Ellen, I'm not going to ask you a question. You're being so nice. Marshall Matz, my question's for the fellow from up north there in North Dakota. Roger, you surprised me with one answer. In answer to Dan's question, you said you thought that the Congress would appropriate as much money in cash as they would appropriate for commodities. Or did you say that? Was that what I understood?
No, I don't, if I said that, I didn't intend to say that. No, I think.
All good.
I mean, I do believe that there is a very legitimate political argument that Ellen just made about if you turn this into cash only, the politics of getting an appropriation are much more difficult than the politics associated with giving American products and having the flag and all that. The politics. From an economic efficiency standpoint, it would be the opposite answer, but
I'm glad I gave you a chance to maybe.
No, I think it was in
misunderstood
response
that question.
when Dan asked Ellen, would they give $250,000 or $250 million in an appropriation? My answer was no, I don't think they would have. I mean, politics wouldn't support an increased budget for it.
I don't.
No.
Just looking what the House is doing on food stamps right now, I just can't imagine that they would appropriate $1.5 billion in cash as quickly as they are for commodities.
Let's see, I saw a hand, gentleman, the red shirt back there. We'll try to get to everybody.
Is Bohendwa. I'm a national of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Congo has enormous potential in agriculture, so does Africa. I was basically wondering if the World Food Program and the United States and the entire international community has been considering addressing the root causes of food insecurity in Africa, rather than basically focusing on the symptoms of the issues.
And root causes would be?
Basically trying to tap, into the agricultural potential. Basically coming up with structures that would basically try to ensure that the people are fed in Africa and mostly in other parts of the world where there is food insecurity. For instance, in my country, the current Prime Minister, Matata Ponyo, has been trying to invest into agriculture because if you look at the Congo and its mining sectors, the people argue that, and the evidence that's there is showing that the coltan, diamonds, and all the natural resources have more of being a curse than a blessing, to the country. So we're shifting into the agricultural potential. So just a curiosity if the world has been considering in investing into that. Thank you.
I don't know, maybe Dr. Fenn, you could.
Yeah, actually, I was there just about a month ago. I had a chance to meet some of your government officials, Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister. I do agree with you that the DRC Congo has great potential to develop its agriculture to feed itself, and also big part of Africa. So the country has more than 100 million hectares of good land that has not been developed, bigger than China, total arable land. It's just tremendous. We also have a pretty large program there in helping your Prime Minister. We actually have a senior person advising the Prime Minister in developing its agricultural strategy, investment strategy. The World Bank is putting $400 million there. I really hope the U.S. could also do more there. I think Hillary Clinton visited the country about 2 years ago, not to talk, but I really wanted to see more engagement from U.S. to help the country to convert the potential. You cannot eat potential. The Congolese always told us, we cannot eat potential. We have to convert our potential to food. So my advice here is, yes, U.S. government should really look into this country more seriously, to work with other donors, the World Bank, European Union, Brussels, Belgium, not Brussels, Belgium, and even Chinese. Chinese quite active there in terms of mining sector. So I just had a discussion with Rogers on this so-called Dutch disease, like you're North Dakota. So when you have minerals, you have resources, boom. If you don't do carefully, it will drive your wages up. That will affect your agricultural, other sectors negatively. So we call it a Dutch disease. But the Dutch obviously solved the problem a long time ago. I really hope the DRC should also change that situation, otherwise we'll call it DRC disease.
Well, I would credit the administration, the Feed the Future initiative and the related things they're doing at AID is trying to focus on comprehensive ways of developing African agriculture, better than probably we've seen before in a long time. So.
As I understand, one of the what I think is a key to what they're doing is basically going country by country and saying, develop governance, get a rules-based system, show that there's competence in how you're going to govern, and we will invest with you. But we're not going to just keep dumping money, resources into places where it disappears for unintended reasons.
And Dan, I think that's what you mean.
That's right.
I think that's, Roger, you've hit it, because in Feed the Future, the Democratic Republic of Congo is not a partner. Feed the Future is the United States Agriculture Development and Food Security Program. We call it Feed the Future. You can actually go online and Google it. And it does have a lot of investment in Africa, and not just investment in particular countries that are partner countries, but regionally. So, for example, to deal with the infrastructure issues, the trade issues, common diseases, plant diseases, wheat rust, aflatoxin. So it deals with all this, biotechnology, introducing, better research. So it's dealing with all those issues. The Democratic Republic of Congo is not a partner in that. And there are reasons, and Roger kind of hit on some of it, because you have to show that you've actually something called CADUP. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's an African Union-driven policy to improve agriculture on the continent by countries committing 10% of their budget toward agriculture development. So you have to hit certain benchmarks in a country before the U.S. will commit, and before many others will commit. So
Let's see, I saw there's a lady with the glasses here, and then I'll get this gentleman up here afterwards.
Paola Rivera with Humanitas Global, and my question is for any of the panelists regarding aquaculture. It's often overlooked in these debates, and it definitely offers a lot in terms of efficiency and new markets. And I was wondering, I'm leaving this kind of open-ended, what you guys thought about that.
Aquaculture. A billion people or more rely on fishing and fish to survive on, often in the developing world. Are you?
Well,
are you-
yeah, I agree. The agriculture is one of the sectors that we have overlooked. In many of the emerging economies, like China, maybe Mexico, Vietnam, the agriculture sector actually accounts a pretty big share of their overall agriculture GDP, almost 20% or even more. And the sector has grown also very fast. It's a pity that Africa has not taken that issue more seriously. Africa, the growth in fisheries sector is still very, very little, very slow. So potential is there. On the other hand, as you know, the agriculture also has a huge environmental impact, particularly in some of the domestic farms, shrimp farms, fish farms, and how we can work together to bring the science to the sector to make sure that the seafood will be produced sustainably without damaging our environment. In fact,
and water resources is
it's
probably
one
the
of the
biggest
huge
issue of our
one of the-
times. Let's see, this gentleman right here.
Thank you for taking my question. Thanks for this panel. My name is Lucas Coach. I'm with Food for the Hungry. We're an NGO. We have participated in food assistance programs around the globe. Coming back to the food aid reform debate that you're all discussing, you each touched a little bit on some of the costs involved in food aid programs. As the food aid reform debate is engaging around efficiency, effectiveness, and flexibility, cost is a big part of that debate. If you could help us just go through that a bit more, where some of those touch points you've already touched on around maybe a myth-fact kind of piece around the cost of commodities, shipping, programming costs around U.S. food aid programs and the reform debate, that would be helpful.
I don't know, Ellen, you want to take that, or you?
Well, I think
There's got to be some data too.
there are a couple. Well, the problem is that the data are a little bit weak there. But there is the thing about it is the main budget savings. The president came in with a budget reform package. In that package, it was assuming that food aid would become the main food aid program will be dissolved. Certain amount of cash, $250 million from that account, would go into a development assistance account. It would just be there as cash. So no more food aid associated with it. It was really to support the types of developmental and resilience programs that are being conducted now with food aid resources and funds. So we get rid of the food aid piece. So in that sense, they're saying, and then a part of the food aid program that is monetization falls under those. And they said, by so doing, we're going to save $30 million a year because there's a $30 million loss to the program on average. They're averaging out. It's a $400 million program right now, the food aid that's for development. They say there's a $30 million loss. So we'll gain $30 million, they said, because that's the cost we don't recover when we monetize. So that's their way of looking at the savings there. So they're going to save that $330 million. They're going to move $250 million to make it cash, no longer associated with food, and it can do development activities with the poor, like we're doing under food aid now, except you don't have the food component. So we lose the food component. The part that stays food is now all under this cash account called International Disaster Assistance. In that account, they say they're going to save $50 million from that because they're going to be reducing how much is bought in the United States. This is what Dan was mentioning, because only 55% of the food aid would be bought in the United States, and the remainder, the 45%. So 750, to give you the number, $775 million would be U.S. food aid, and the remainder would be coming up to $1.4 billion. So the 45% would be bought overseas. They claim that by reducing how much is bought from the United States, they're going to save $50 million a year. Not out of the food aid program. But you see, right now, this is where it gets confusing. Everyone was saying, well, where are the savings showing up? They show up because there's a requirement that the Maritime Administration has to pay back into the food aid account a certain amount of money each year to make up for the difference between U.S. and foreign flag rates, and there's actually a little bit more, a little cream on top of that. So they're saying because the Maritime Administration is no longer paying they say we'll save about $50 million of this repayment that goes into the program, but it's really a cut to the program of
I
$50
think
million.
Nancy
Does that make any
Lindborg-
sense?
It's going to be very convenient. Nancy is here.
But that's
She's
it.
going to
That's
probably
it.
talk a
That's
little
the
bit about that. I don't know, Roger, you might want to add to this.
Let me just underscore a point that I made earlier, and it is a very fundamental difference that exists in today's marketplace compared to when these programs were first established. When these programs were first established, the government could almost legitimately look at the commodities that they were providing as free, because they owned them. Farmers had already forfeited them to the government, and they were in stocks, and in fact, it was costing the government to store the stuff. And so they literally almost had no value to the government. And so they wanted to get them out of the system to help support prices here, which were abysmally low. Today, that's entirely different. We have, in the last several years, record farm prices. And so they're actually going in and buying that stuff in this country and then paying for the cost of shipping it. So the transaction costs are enormously different.
The important point is that even when we provide commodities, we have to buy them. The economic impact to taxpayers is essentially the same, not identical, but the same as if it were giving cash as well. That is, the commodities are not free. They have to be bought in order to send them.
Whereas before they basically were owned. So,
But there is another difference. I mean, even if you cut the farmer out, there is economic activity in the United States from moving the commodity and that's where you get the pushback. It's not just you know what I mean?
No.
It's because there's
But
jobs
there is
and
some
economic
impression out there
stimulus.
that, the commodities are free and therefore we don't have to pay for
they
them.
are.
That's
Oh,
not
no,
true.
we buy them. We buy
I'm
them.
an observer of the U.S. agriculture policy. It's very interesting to see farmers changing their position on this. 5 or 6 years ago, right? Farmers was the strongest lobby group.
Well, and
but now, as you said, the market has changed.
And I probably ought to be clear, I'm sure that there are farmers union members who really believe that the most important thing we can do is to keep buying these commodities. And that's not to say there isn't value to it. My only point is that it's a very different economic equation today than what it was way back when. And we ought to think about that.
Whether we get a farm bill or not.
Whether we get a farm bill or not.
I have a suggestion. There's a very good report. I know you hate to read the report. By Chris Barrett, a professor from Cornell. He analyzed the pros and cons of U.S. food aid. I don't know whether you have read that report. It's published in 2013. It's fresh new, evidence-based. Look at the cost side, the benefit side. So Chris Barrett.
Chris Barrett, okay. Yes. I think, I'd like to take you, but I think that we have our closing speaker who is here.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so.
First, please join me in thanking our panel for a phenomenal discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Marlon Buckner. I'm the founder of foodpolicy.us, and I'd like to say on behalf of the panelists and our team, thank you so very much for attending this wonderfully informative and vigorous discussion this afternoon. Can we have another round of applause for our panelists and participants? I'd also very much like to thank the team here at NYU. They've been wonderful partners, and we look forward to building our relationship with them in bringing more events of this kind to discuss all of the issues associated with the challenge of food system reform. In addition to the NYU team, I'd like to thank my team at foodpolicy.us, in particular Emma Human, John Raffaelli, Stacy Sala, and in particular my editor, Brett Nadrich, who's done an enormous amount of work to make today possible. Thank you very much. Before I introduce our closing speaker, I'd like to just quickly recognize a special guest who is here with us today, the person who I'm quite sure has traveled furthest to be here. Mr. Biraj Patnaik, the principal advisor to India's Supreme Court on the Right to Food, has taken time from his busy State Department schedule to join us this afternoon, and we're very grateful. Could you stand and be recognized, sir? We are tremendously pleased to have as our closing speaker this afternoon the Honorable Nancy Lindborg. Assistant Administrator, Bureau for Democracy, Conflict, and Humanitarian Assistance at USAID. Ms. Lindborg leads the efforts of more than 500 team members in 9 offices within USAID, focused on crisis prevention, response, recovery, and transition. Since being sworn into office in October of 2010, Ms. Lindborg has led DCHA teams in response to numerous crises, including the Syrian situation, the Arab Spring, and the Sahel 2012 drought, to name just a few. Ms. Lindborg has spent most of her career working on issues of transition, democracy, and civil society, conflict, and humanitarian response. Prior to joining USAID, she was the president of Mercy Corps, where she spent 14 years helping grow the organization into a globally respected organization known for innovative programs in the most challenging environments. Her several degrees are from Stanford and Harvard, and we are very, very pleased that she has made time from her busy schedule to join us this afternoon. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Nancy Lindborg.
Thanks a lot. It's great to see everybody who's braved a very hot day. I want to really thank and congratulate Marlon. Thank you for holding the event, and thank you for founding this organization. It's a terrific mission and spans a lot of issues that people are deeply concerned about. Also, thank you for the panel. I got a quick download on the issues that you discussed, and all wonderful thinkers and doers in this realm. So congratulations on the conversation that you had. I wanted to close us out today just to talk a little bit about the administration's proposal for food aid reform. You know, we rolled this out in April, knowing that this was not going to be easy, but knowing that it would enable us to really, in a more cost-effective way, reach millions of children around the world who depended on U.S. food assistance, and really honoring what has been a 60-year tradition of partnership with the Farmers of America and the humanitarian community. We heard from Executive Director Cousins, a tradition of being there when it counted to feed people around the world, and knowing that we had the opportunity to enable us to have additional tools so that we had more flexibility to make the difference that we were seeking to make. For those of you who are tracking this issue, and I hope everybody here will do so, last month there was a vote on the House floor for an amendment that was introduced by Congress members Royce and Engel, which more or less mirrored the administration's proposal in terms of the introduction of greater flexibility in how we did this work. We had an amazing vote of 203 votes for the proposal and 220 against. So a 17-vote difference split along bipartisan lines that affirmed the importance of maintaining our tradition of being a global leader in providing food assistance to hungry people, but doing it with greater flexibility, still in partnership with American farmers, but giving us the ability to increase the use of cash, of vouchers, and to end the practice of monetization. So, this has been an extraordinary journey just since April, where we've had amazing support. Congressman Royce and Engel, Congresswoman Bass, Senator Pryor, Republican and Democratic members in both the House and Senate have really come forward to engage on this issue in a very constructive way. And an amazing partnership that goes from John Bolton to John Podesta to Heritage to CAP to AEI. I mean, this has just been a phenomenal bipartisan swelling of support that says, you know what, it's time to have this conversation to consider how we can do this important mission better. An enormous amount of press coverage. Hopefully you saw some of it across the country. And I had really hoped to be here for the whole conversation today, and my apologies to have missed this. I had a last-minute meeting that was called at the White House on Syria, and it really underscores one of the most important reasons for this food aid reform, and that is the example that we have right now today in Syria, where the United States is the largest donor for provision of food assistance, we would not be able to do what we're doing in Syria today, where we are literally keeping millions of people alive through assistance, food assistance, if we didn't already have some of the flexibility that we have through the cash accounts, the $300 million that we have every year, because none of the assistance inside Syria is through the commodities that we ship. That is 100% a cash-based program. And in fact, it is straining our ability to use some of that flexibility that we have in other parts of the world where it's also necessary. So in places that have a lot of access constraints, where we're not able, for some reason, to get in our commodities, or places as Ertharin Cousin mentioned, where there's already food on the markets and you don't want to depress it, we absolutely rely on and need more of that kind of flexibility. We also know that these reforms are seeking to give us more effectiveness, more timeliness. There have been a lot of studies on local regional purchase that look at how we can get savings of up to 35 to 50% if we're able to source foods locally and at the same time, by the way, support local farmers who are seeking to improve their food production. We know we can get it there faster. If we're able to buy locally, we can shave 11 to 14 weeks off of how quickly we can get food into the region or into the hands of hungry families. Part of what we do with our food assistance is not just the delivery of emergency help that keeps families alive, but it's also the part that is developmentally oriented, that helps improve farmers' abilities to grow food, for families to keep their children healthier. And we do that currently through a process called monetization. There are studies that have shown that we have a 75% cost recovery rate for monetization. Therefore, we lost last year about $31 million through the transactional cost, the procuring, the shipping, the transport. We know that we can do that process more effectively if we can just immediately put cash into the hands of the groups that are doing those development activities. That's not to say that we don't see times and places where monetization can be helpful, but we want the flexibility so that you can choose the best tool to accomplish what we most want to do. With the proposal that we made, even in a time of shrinking budgets and ever tighter resources, that proposal would have enabled us to reach more people with the same resources more efficiently and more effectively. And we know that U.S. agriculture will continue to play an important role. We don't envision that anytime soon we will be able to meet all the global food needs without heavy partnership of the American agricultural community. It's not possible. There is not enough supply globally, and in particular in those areas that need food the most. When we were responding to the drought in the Horn of Africa in 2011, 2012, there were global shortages. It was absolutely critical that we were able to bring in U.S. grain as quickly and as efficiently as possible, and using some of the warehouses we've set up that create opportunities for us to stage food to be available. So we are not suggesting that that goes away. Again, the mantra is to have the flexibility to use all the possible tools, cash, vouchers, local regional purchase, and be able to do it more effectively. We heard a lot of concerns when we were talking to people since April, over the last few months, about this proposal. One is that, you know what, if you don't do it the same way that you've always done it, you're going to lose the opportunity to tell people that we're helping them, the food bags that have become so iconic around the world. So I brought a prop. I want everyone to know that we're not abandoning that. Even when it's locally purchased, we ask our partners to use USAID food bags. This is a bag from the Democratic Republic of Congo that was a locally purchased food program. They put the food in this bag because it's still about the people of America providing a helping hand. So there is no intention of not using the food bags. When we use cash and vouchers, they have the USAID logo. This is not about stealth assistance. It's about using the right approach to help people in the most effective way possible. And the other prop that I brought is we also know that one of the important innovations is ensuring that we have the most nutritious food available. So one of the ways in which we see American farmers and producers continuing to be a really important partner is as we move to creating even more nutritious products that are especially appropriate for malnourished children under 5 who have problems digesting grains or a lot of less easily digestible foods. So we have worked over the last 2 years to reformulate a number of our products. This is an example of one that we've done in partnership with the peanut industry to create, it's called Ready-to-Eat Therapeutic Foods. I know it's a really sexy name, but this product saves a lot of lives, especially for the youngest and most malnourished. And again, during the Horn crisis, there was a global shortage of this product, and our suppliers were able to do an emergency production, and we were able to get full speed this product into the pipeline so that we could continue to meet the needs of malnourished children. That won't stop. That will continue. That's having all the tools available that you need. We also heard that it'll have a big impact on the ocean carriers and on our mariner partners. Again, we're not talking about ending the shipping of products. That will remain an important part. The administration is working to support U.S. flag vessels and the merchant mariners. There was a $25 million component to the proposal to specifically support those mariners. And DOD has done an analysis that says very specifically they don't see any impact on our military readiness. So we believe that as we look ahead, that we have the opportunity to continue the conversations and continue working on all the ways that we can come together to find solutions to move forward towards a more modernized food assistance approach that enables us to feed more hungry people around the world with more flexibility. There's been a lot of talk for the last decade about the Iron Triangle, as it's called, and for those of you who don't know what that is, it was referred to as the NGOs, the food producers, and the shippers. And that Iron Triangle would never let us change anything about how we did our food assistance. We've already added a lot of flexibility. Most of those Iron Triangle members are now part of what I think of as a new geometry for how we're looking to meet global needs around the world. You know, I'm looking for the right geometric shape. Is it a golden circle? I mean, I invite your feedback on that, but if we are moving inexorably towards a new geometry on ensuring that we have the most effective ways to meet global hunger needs. We invite the good thinking of folks like you, and we'll continue the consultations in the months ahead as we look at how to move this forward into the next stage. Thank all of you who have participated in this, all of you who may be a part of delivering food assistance or working with farmers around the world, and we welcome the partnership going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assistant Administrator Lindborg. We very much appreciate your presence here. Let me, in closing, ask everyone to please join us in the lobby upstairs for refreshments and further conversation and discussion. Let me again thank our distinguished panel, my dear friend Secretary Glickman, Brett Nadrich, our editor. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you at our next event.